I'm Robyn Chapman. I'm an editor at First Second, and I'm so happy you're here today for our Maker Comics panel. But before we got started, I just wanted to say a few words. You know, Comics Relief was created to bring readers and authors together during a difficult time, during a global pandemic. And, you know, in the last 2 weeks, the times have gotten a lot more difficult. America has witnessed the murder of George Floyd on its television screen. We heard him cry out for help, and we heard him cry out for his mother. It's not something that you can unsee. Of course, violence against Black people, it's not new in this country. It's a problem that's centuries old. Right now, it's just a lot more visible. But I wanted to say loud and clear, Black Lives Matter. First Second stands against racism, and we stand with those who are right now fighting for justice. We stand with Black authors and Black readers. We're very much here to celebrate and support you and your stories, especially if those stories are told in words and pictures. In that case, we very much want to see them, so please send them our way. Okay, thank you, and I would like to now start the panel, and I'm gonna do the tricky part, which is share my screen, so please bear with me. So let's talk about Maker Comics. I am the series editor of Maker Comics, along with my co-editors, Allison Wilgus, who, if you watched the last session, she's the author of Mars Challenge. Allison and Bethany Bryan are my co-editors on this series. And I'm here today with three of my authors, Falynn Koch, who did Bake Like a Pro, Sarah Myer, who did Create a Costume, and JP Coovert, who did Draw a Comic. So the way this is going to work is in a few minutes, I'm going to hand over the mic to my authors so they can walk you through a presentation they put together. They're going to talk about their process, how they write and draw these books. They're also going to talk about their background as makers and as cartoonists. And let's see, and what else are they going to do? They're also going to talk about just the background process, the making of these works. And the books themselves. So you'll see a lot of artwork from these books. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk about the Maker Comics series, in case you're just haven't seen it before, if you aren't familiar with this series. So Maker Comics is a DIY graphic novel series. It's meant to teach kids, but also teens and adults, to teach them how to master a specific hobby or craft. For example, car repair or robotics. The idea is you'd read this book, it would walk you through step-by-step instructions on how to complete a number of projects. So by the end, you'll have baked some chocolate chip cookies, or you'll have sewn a witch costume, or you'll have printed a comic using a photocopier. So yeah, the books are very goal-focused. Each one has about 5 or 8 projects that the reader can do from start to finish and actually make something by the end of it. Let me just advance the slide. Oh, yep, there's some of our titles. So yeah, these are instructional graphic novels. That's their point, but they do have stories in them. There's characters, there's plots. The instruction is really baked into the storytelling. And my feeling is comics is really the perfect medium for instruction. There's a reason when you get on the airplane and they give you the instructions on how to exit the plane in the case of an emergency, they give you a comic. When you're putting together your IKEA furniture, the instructions that come with it, it's a comic. Comics are just a really great medium for teaching someone how to do something that's complicated, something they've never done before. I think it's just the perfect way to teach. So that's really the concept behind Maker Comics. And the books you see on the screen are the ones we have in print right now, and we have several titles in the works. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to our authors, starting off with Falynn Koch, who of course did Bake Like a Pro. And Falynn, I'm going to advance the slides. Just let me know when I should go forward.
All right, microphone's on, we're all good? Okay, I did it. We did technology. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through really quick. I know we've got a lot of stuff to cover. So this is just a real slapdash run through of who I am, what the comic's about, and a little bit of how I made it, some background info. So first of all, I've done 2 other books with First Second. They were both in the science series, and that's going to come into play later because we're going to talk a little bit about science of baking, but just a little background. I did bats and plagues. Next. But we're going to talk about baking. Like I said, and we're going to talk about why I worked with First Second, why First Second worked with me to tackle baking and how we decided to approach that as sort of an instructional comic book. So next. So I think a big reason that I was picked was I've always had a background in cooking a little bit, but then I also went to culinary school. So that was a big jump in going from sort of an amateur to knowing more about it. But even when I was in culinary school, I didn't go for pastry. I just went for culinary overall, but you have to take pastry classes. But even then you can see from my slide, I still did all my notes like a comic, how they had to be placed and things like that. So even when I wasn't drawing in school, I was still finding ways to draw. Next. We had to make lots and lots of very fancy pants desserts, which is not my favorite kind, but you know, you got to learn. So next, I also owned a food truck. Again, that wasn't a pastry food truck, but you know, I don't think you should be doing one without the other. I think pastry and baking and cooking, they're just 2 great friends. So next. We did mac and cheese on the food truck, but it was also a Southern food truck. The main thing was mac and cheese. So we had Southern desserts. So these are these sort of weird snickerdoodle whoopie pie things that we made that were really great. And if they didn't take so long to make, I would make every single day. Next. So when I was approached to do the baking comic, I wanted to involve magic, which is weird because baking is so hands-on and it doesn't seem like there's any magic involved. But the way that I feel about baking is that it's a form of alchemy. And alchemy is when you take something that's worthless like tin or coal and you turn it into gold through magic, and then you have a bunch of gold. And I feel like that's baking, because with cooking, I could take a piece of chicken and put it in the oven and just make it hot and I cooked it. But you can't just take like whole eggs and raw flour and stick them in the oven and then like get a baked good. You have to do stuff to it and you have to do it in the right order. And there's a lot of science in it. But before I got into all the research, I was like, who is a baking wizard? What does that look like? So I just kind of went with all sorts of stuff. I was trying to find sort of a professional chef wizard sort of look, and you can see that. Next. And then I also thought about who are my main characters going to be. And I talked for a while about should it be men? Should it be women? Should they be children? Should they be adults? And that's the thing about baking, is almost anybody can do it if you want to learn how, which is sort of the point of the book. So I just did my own life, which is me, and I had pink hair at the time, and my pastry chef at the International Culinary Center, who was Chef Mimi, and I just decided I was going to do sort of a rough version of us. So I planned those characters out. And I also, you can see I planned the kitchen out, because if you're going to draw something for like 120 pages, you kind of don't want to forget where it is. So I kind of picked what I would think was an ideal kitchen, which in my head is half the room. So I just went with that. So next. And then basically, if you read the book, it's a lot of visual instructions. Another reason I picked magic is to get the hands out of the way, just an excuse, because even though baking is all with your hands, mostly, other than a couple tools, you know, drawing hands and hands and hands and hands for 120 pages-ish is going to get sort of old. So I sort of use magic as an excuse to like have everything float and be presented and lovely for the audience and the reader. Next. So as you can see, just another page, an example of like sort of a step-by-step getting everything set up. And then next, I also make sure to add a lot of science into it, even science of stuff that doesn't seem very scientific. Like this page is about why there's different crusts on top of pies and what's happening to those pies, why some do and some don't, because I think it's really important to not just know how to do something, but why you're doing it. And then that way, when you get creative, you can make informed decisions about your baking or, you know, your costume making or your comics making, if you sort of know why you're doing it instead of just how to do it. So next. And I just wanted to include these were for the cover. Even with the cover, even drawing digitally, I do a lot of versions of things. I don't think you just you know, the final version doesn't magically appear. This is 3 of maybe dozens of covers that I did. And that's just one example of, you know, trying stuff over and over again. You know, baking and making comics is similar in that way. You're going to make a couple failures. That's okay. You just keep going and you make lots and lots of them, and everybody will enjoy it in the end. Next, just sort of see the final project of me working digitally and working through it. Next. And that's basically, I just want to give a little run through of me and my background and the comic, and we'll talk more about all that stuff later. And here's our little character. She's not being very careful, so I hope in the future, if you read the book, if you haven't yet, that you're careful and you don't burn yourself and knives are sharp, and that you make lovely, lovely baked goods. And thank you, and I will turn it over.
Thanks so much, Falynn. I'm going to go on to the next author, which is Sarah Myer. Sarah, can you turn on your mic?
Hi. All right. Hi, I'm Sarah Myer. I am from Whitehall, Maryland, and I'm a freelance comic artist, illustrator, and story artist. And I've been making my own costumes and attending anime and comic conventions since the late 90s, so for a while now. And this was my first graphic novel. Next. So if you're wondering, cosplay is a portmanteau of the words costume and play. And it refers to the act of wearing costumes that are intended to portray a specific character from anime or cartoons or comic books. And most cosplayers wear their costumes at comic and anime or pop culture conventions, but this picture of me as a kid wearing a Sailor Mars costume is from Halloween in the 90s. And then that's my first time cosplaying at a convention as Ash Ketchum there. So next. And here are some cosplay costumes that I've made over the past 9 years. So from like 2010 to 2019. And just to give you an idea, some people prefer to just wear the costume and maybe pose for photos if they're asked at a convention, while others prefer to act like completely in character, or even act out scenes with other cosplayers the entire time, or in skits or photo shoots. I tend to just kind of walk around in my costume and then pose in character for a photo. Next. So some considerations for creating the instructional book, Create a Costume, was first of all, we wanted to make sure that the projects inside were affordable and cost efficient. So before encouraging readers to go out and buy new fabric, you know, there was a part of the book where we talked about using secondhand items or found items whenever possible. And also, of course, an emphasis on safety, both during fabrication of the costumes and while wearing them. Next. And I also wanted to make sure that the projects were easy and approachable for beginners and included items that are commonly found in readers' homes already, and or items that are easily found and purchased in craft stores. Next. So here's a little bit of the process going from thumbnails with some notes kind of scrawled in to the pencils and then to the finished art, which is, you know, inked and colored and has the text overlaid. Next. And here's my final cover there on the, I guess, yeah, the left or the right, sorry. And some sketches that I had provided initially when we were trying to decide what the cover would look like. As you can see, the scale of the characters was so different with 2 human characters and a little hamster. So a big part of that design challenge was trying to find a way to incorporate all 3 of those main characters without, you know, losing any one of them. Next. And lastly, I had a lot of fun with this character, Costume Critter. So here's a picture of the standee of the character that I made for promoting the book at artist tables at conventions. So yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And then moving on to our last author, JP, turn on your mic and take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. So my name is JP. I'm the author of Maker Comics Draw a Comic, and I make a lot of stuff. I obviously write and draw comics. I design skateboard graphics. I make videos about Dungeons and Dragons, and I guess. Well, next slide. First of all, yeah, thank you. Really, I'm obsessed with this feeling that you get when you take an idea out of your head and you turn it into something real, like something that you can actually hold in your hands. And I think that's what all this Maker Comics series, what makes it really cool and fun and all that. So I guess when I was little, you know, that feeling started with building Legos, you know, like building a castle and destroying it and then making a pirate ship. And then I discovered drawing and just being able to take something from my imagination and with just some crayons and a piece of paper, like turn it into something real. You know, it captured all of my time and I didn't want to do anything else but that. Let's see. So the first comic I made, it was called Black Holes. It was about my friends and I getting superpowers. And I wish I've looked around everywhere for it and I couldn't find it. So instead, here's a picture I drew of Wolverine when I was 10, around that same time. Okay, next slide. So flashing forward a little bit, in high school, in the very back of the library, like way in the back, I found a photocopier that nobody used. I think I was the whole time I was in high school, I think I was the only person that used this photocopier. And it was like this new thing that I could make copies of my drawings and comics. And okay, next slide. This is the first comic I made on that copy machine. It's called Sub City Ninja. If you couldn't tell, I wrote it twice on the cover. I don't know why. And it's about a kid who is a ninja. And honestly, there's not much more to it than that. But I was sort of overtaken by this copier in the back of the library. I made way too many copies, and I was so excited to give this comic out to all of my friends, but I had so many copies I didn't have enough friends to give it out to, so I still have a ton of these sitting in a box. So yeah, okay, next slide. Flash forward again, and I've made over 50 comics, you know, start to finish, writing and drawing and making the books and giving them to my friends. And I think this is why Robyn asked me to work on the Draw a Comic book. Next slide. So Draw a Comic is all about making your own comics, just like I did back in high school. Next slide. So the story follows Maggie and Rex as they inherit a comics library and try and fix it up. Next slide. And they take you all around this town here, and you get to meet all of these different people that love comic books as Maggie and Rex sort of teach you how to make your own comic. Next slide. Everybody loves comics except for this dude. This is Dr. Carl. He just hasn't given comics a chance yet. He's sort of the villain of the book. Next slide. So the projects take you from learning how to draw just a simple 3-panel comic strip all the way up to creating your own comic book. There's 6 projects in the book. Next slide. So my process for making the book is actually a little weird talking about it, because I'm basically just following the steps that Maggie and Rex outline in the book. So I started with a script, kind of planning it all out in words, and then did thumbnails or like really, really rough drawings, and then pencil, ink, and then adding color. And I think the really cool thing about breaking it up into steps like this is that when you're working on a really big project, being able to go step by step makes it a little less intimidating of a process, and you can just focus on one step at a time. And the cool thing that I discovered working on a longer project like this is that at each step of the way, the book got better and better as we went. Next slide. Okay, the last thing, there is something I sort of felt guilty about while I was working on the book the whole time, and I'm going to use this opportunity here to sort of get it off my chest. So the big difference between how I worked on the book and how Maggie and Rex in the story talk about making comics is that I worked completely digitally, whereas they are teaching you all about all the awesome tools and art supplies that you can use to make your own comics. So the point is, even though I used a computer for everything, I just want to make it super clear that you can just use some Sharpies on some scrap paper to draw a comic about a weird ninja or whatever you want, and you can find a photocopier in the back of your school library and make a bunch of comics to give to your friends. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing this slideshow, and this is now the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And please do ask, because I don't think we've gotten any questions yet, but I do have some prepared. I guess the first question, I'll just open this to all the panelists, is what sort of research goes into these books?
Should we just jump in, or should we?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
We'll just play it by ear. Maybe if you want to wave your hand first, that might help.
I know for me personally, there's a lot of baking books out there. I had to look for books that were specifically about the science of it and why they worked, instead of just sort of like, I did a baking book and it was about my time in the south of France and it was great. Those are great, but I didn't need those. And I also talked to a lot of actual human beings who are professionals and who've been doing either only pastry or run professional restaurants for a lot longer. So I think there's a lot to be said for like finding people that you look up to and then just asking them, and more often than not, people love to help and contribute and also eat all your recipes, because I had to make a lot of baked goods for this. So they're also happy to do that too.
JP, Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, my cat is harassing me for attention right now. So if you hear her meowing, that's what's going on. I actually, so I don't own a serger or a very super up-to-date sewing machine. So one of the things that I ended up doing is I looked at a bunch of different models that would be available to readers, and I tried to make an amalgam sort of those models and those layouts, thinking about, okay, what's the features that those models would have in common if I were to put in an average, sewing machine in the book for the portion where they're talking about the basic anatomy of a sewing machine. And I guess some of the research aspect in terms of thinking of the projects was to let my mind kind of wander back in time a little bit, because some of the things that I have access to now, or that I might be able to afford in terms of materials, I have to think, you know, the demographic of the book might be somebody who's just starting out, might be somebody who's been cosplaying for a while, but wants some new tips. So I thought about, okay, what would I have wanted to know about when I was just starting out? So, you know, it wasn't a super thorough research process, but it was definitely changing my mindset, you know, not talking about, you know, casting gems in resin quite yet, for example, but thinking about, okay, what are ways that somebody could use foil if they don't have access to something like, you know, rub and buff or something a little bit more expensive.
Great. Let's see. So, Falynn, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about science, the science of your books. How do you teach? Like, what like visual and tools did you use to teach how yeast works, for example, or how to make a chewy cookie versus a crisp cookie?
I love that you mentioned yeast, because I actually, as a character, I love drawing yeast because it has such personality, because it's sort of alive and it's like sort of a fungus, but sort of not. And I don't know, I'm just glad that you mentioned that, because even before I did this comic, I would draw yeast like eating sugar, and then it farts out gas and it makes alcohol, and it's just this weird little critter. So stuff like that is just, I love to read comics like that. I like to learn from comics. So I just wanted to put that. So when I talk about the science of baking in it, like for instance, when I talk about the proteins in eggs and why when you whip eggs, they get fluffy, I get to actually draw the proteins and the amino acids like grabbing air, which makes so much more sense to me, because an amino acid, it's just like the concept of something. It's not like a physical, like it's not a mug and it's not a desk or anything like that. Like amino acids are like chemical bonds. So it's fun to be able to draw something that doesn't hold on to stuff the way that people describe it to, but then I get to take that and make them actually hold on to air or fat or anything like that. So I just really like drawing the science of all the baking, because it makes people understand, why are you doing this process? Why would I whip this way? Why do I, you know, add this to this other thing? And it's like, oh, we're going to get down to the nitty gritty and it's going to be really fun. So I like, that's how I approach it, sort of like the science of it.
And Sarah, I had a question for you, which I know the answer to, but I want you to talk about. So that's why I'm asking it. Why did you create the critter, the costume critter, as a protagonist for this book? That's the cute little hamster, by the way.
Yeah. So one of the I guess this is really similar to what JP and Falynn talked about, the actual process of sewing. You know, there's a lot of hands involved and fingers, and the scale of, you know, a needle, for example, being threaded. You know, I could have drawn it with one of the characters, you know, human hands threading that needle, but I thought, first of all, it would be a great thing to have a character that is kind of to scale. So a hamster fit the bill there. That way you can have an expressive character who's actually using their whole body to show these tiny things, such as like threading a bobbin or putting a bobbin into the sewing machine, and, you know, laying down things like craft gems and gluing them, and threading a needle. And, you know, the other reason is I just thought it would be nice to have a character that is very cuddly and cute and fun to draw throughout. One of my favorite things was drawing the costume critter wearing all of the little hamster-sized versions of costumes. So the character served those two purposes.
Great. And I have a question for JP. Though this really, all of you could answer this, so maybe after JP is done, if the rest of you have something you'd like to add. JP, what kind of advice can you give to a young cartoonist who would like to be, like you, a professional cartoonist who's making graphic novels?
I think the big thing is to start making comics, and starting small and working bigger. So like even how we did it in the book, of starting with a comic strip and working your way up to making an actual comic book, or, you know, looking back at my experience, I started that ninja comic was, I think, 6 pages, and then I did an 8-page comic, and then 12-page. You know, kept going from there. So I think, yeah, starting small with little stories, and then getting bigger and bigger is a great way to learn. And then if you have like a project, like I do an autobiographical comic strip that's just 4 panels, and I do it once a week, sometimes twice a week. Something that you can kind of keep as an ongoing project that's small in scale, but it actually ends up, you know, growing much larger as you go. If you want to do something larger, that's a great way to start. I hope that's good advice.
Yeah, that's great. Sarah, Falynn, do you have anything to add to that question?
I mean, that kind of covers it. I think somebody said once, maybe I read it on Twitter or something like that, but it's basically you can edit a bad page, whether it's a comic page or you're writing a book or whatever. You can make something bad better, but you can't edit something that doesn't exist yet. So just make it, and you can always improve, and, you know, just go from there. But if you do nothing, then no one can read it and no one can see it, and you can't make any more and all that stuff. So you got to just start and jump in.
Yeah, the comic in your head might be perfect, but no one else can see it. I guess as an editor, I'll just add, you know, we're looking for you. We're looking for talent. So make it easier for us. Like all these authors I discovered either at comic conventions or by going to a school and doing portfolio reviews, or like by word of mouth recommendations, but they did the work of putting their work out there for us to discover. So go to comic conventions table, do an Instagram, do a web comic, just to, you know, focus on the work and share it with the world. And we do have a couple of questions from the audience. Sammy asks, how did you find the balance between telling each book's story and placing an emphasis on the instruction?
That was fun. I'll just jump in. I know for me, it was picking what project for this, it's a recipe, but for all of the books, there's individual projects that you're encouraged to do. And I think that's part of it, is picking stuff that maybe it's not like beginner level, like you've never heard of baking before, which would be weird, or you've never tried to make a comic before, but you're just past that point, because you want something that, for me, for baking, you know, I wanted to tell the story that incorporated recipes that were familiar, so you would know what you're getting at the end. Like you said, with like chewy cookies or crispy cookies and stuff like that, people know what that is, people know what they're going for. So something familiar, but also slightly a challenge. So that's the tricky part, where I was trying to find an overall story where they could cover a lot of projects that were maybe not the most basic, but maybe sort of fun, and you sort of knew where you were going, so that when you got to the end, you would know if you were successful or not, even if you've never done it before.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in. I think with the overall plot of Maker Comics Create a Costume is that Bea and Parker, the two best friends, are getting ready for a convention that they heard about in a comic store. So you have sort of a time-based plot there that's just arching over the entire portion of the entire book. And the book concludes with them going to their first convention. And that provided an opportunity to, you know, demonstrate some behaviors that they might see at a convention, and, you know, just give some tips for a young person who might be just first attending a big event like that, because there's just so much going on. It's easy to be overwhelmed. That was a good opportunity to talk about cosplay does not equal consent and other harassment-based issues that have come about, not just in recent years, but have been around since the beginning of, you know, fan events like that. And then the projects, as they flowed from, say, magical girl and boy costumes to creating a space, like an astronaut, or, you know, even a monster character at the end, it first goes through like basics of just sewing two pieces of fabric together, and then into things like using cardboard and forming something more three-dimensional, or I guess using a lot of paint for effects. So I thought that it would make sense to keep things very basic with sewing first, and then kind of gradually move into sort of special effects type costumes.
Great, great. JP, did you want to add something?
I guess for Draw a Comic, the project part was pretty easy for us to work out. We know we wanted to like build up to creating a comic book at the end, but the story, that was the hard part. So I think there was like three different stories. Like it started with Maggie being this like kind of Indiana Jones adventurer looking for like a treasure, a lost comics treasure, and I think the story didn't serve the purpose of the projects until we got figured out this saving a comics library sort of arc for the story. So for me, the projects came first, and then the story kind of had to like really figure out. So
great, great. So we just have time for one last question. Myron asks, how do you determine whether to make yourself a character or to create characters as the point of view characters of the book? And if this could just be more a general question about like, how do you choose your characters? And Falynn, I have to admit, like, I can't believe this. I didn't realize that was you. It looked, she looks just like you.
It isn't, which I mean, to answer the question, like I said before, when I was talking about it, since anybody can be a baker, and I really wanted to keep it a minimum of 2 characters. It's like, do you do a man and woman? Do you do children? Do you do adults? And I just was like, I'm just going to sort of do my life, which is that, it's just me and my teacher. And that's how I learned when I was in culinary school, and I adored her. So I just thought, I'll go with that. And it's just as simple as that sometimes. So.
Well, with my 2 main characters, Beatrice and Parker, to be honest, B is sort of a little bit based on how I was around maybe age 12 or 13 when I first went to conventions. I was that kid who was like there until the doors closed, running around. She's very enthusiastic and bubbly. Sometimes doesn't really keep her feet on the ground when she's thinking about costume ideas. And that's where Parker, her best friend, comes in. He's supposed to represent a more level-headed sort of, I guess, introverted voice of reason for her. So, and he's a little bit based on some friends that I had growing up who'd be like, yeah, I really don't think you're going to finish like a giant Godzilla costume before the convention next week, that kind of thing. So he served that purpose as well. And the hamster, the narration there, pretty much, that's kind of like, whenever you read the dialogue from the hamster, that's like my adult self, like my current self talking directly to the reader. So that's kind of where those characters came from.
Great, great. And we do have to wrap up, but JP, do you want to add something just quickly? Your book is a little unique because the reader is a character in the book. Like there's a point of view reader character that your characters are talking to.
Yeah, so I wanted Maggie to be an expert. So I think she's the one that knows everything, which didn't feel genuine to make myself, I guess, even though I was writing. So Maggie's an expert, and then the reader basically becomes an intern at this comics library, and is able to learn straight from Maggie, the expert. But I would say if you want to make comics about yourself and your life, which is actually the majority of the comics I make are like that, then put yourself in it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Well, we've come to the end. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Falynn, Sarah, JP. And we're gonna wave goodbye and peace out.
Thank you.
Bye.